Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine, and not just in Ukraine, on the 6th of December of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. But before we start, I would like to tell you that I have updated the map. As you can see, I have added two more regions. Now, we used to have Ukraine, the territory that was or currently under Russian control. We have Israel and Gaza and so on. And now I have added the Russian territory, not just Russian territory, but the territory of Collective Security Treaty Organization. The organization that have 6 members. I'm talking about Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Russian Federation, Armenia, and Belarus. This is a very powerful force in the world, and now we have Russia is the only country from this organization that involved into the special military operation. And I have added the Western countries. I tried to edit NATO countries, but as you can see, there are some countries that are not a part of NATO. I will adjust the map in the future, but now we have better understanding of the situation. Also, there's like a color of United States of America and Canada. So what I was trying to make and show you by adding all these countries and by creating all these zones. First of all, to understand and to receive the answer to the question about possible peace negotiation of upcoming peace agreement between Russian Federation and Western and NATO countries and Ukraine. And according to this map, you need to understand that there are going to be no negotiation process between Russia or between Collective Security Treaty Organization and NATO organization. Why is that? Just take a look at Ukraine. Ukraine is split in two parts. The yellow one is the territories that under Zelensky regime control, and the red part of Ukraine that is under complete Russian control. So if there is a peace negotiation between Russia and Ukraine, that means that the Russians will receive just 10% of the territory of Ukraine. I'm not saying about that the Russians need to split Ukraine. I'm just saying that we condemn any violence in the world, but I believe that the Russians will not agree to give the rest of Ukraine, the yellow one, to the NATO countries. Obviously, this is not in Russian favor. Obviously, this is not even 50-50. And so that means I believe that the Russians will continue special military operation, and they will not stop even if there are going to be some military coup in Kiev. Furthermore, don't forget about the Transnistria, that if the Russians in Ukraine or in the Western countries and Collective Security Treaty Organization sign any peace agreement, obviously the Russians will lose Moldova forever. So that's why I don't think about any end of any special military operation. When talking about the current situation, we know that Zelensky have a lot of problems. We have discussed already about the military aid from the United States of America and so on, and that Joe Biden lost his battle for the funding of Ukraine. He asked the Senate to sign agreement and to send Ukraine money before the new year, before holidays, but there are very high chances that he will not be able to do this. When talking about the second Ukrainian largest ally, I'm talking about Germany. Today, the Minister of Defense of Germany reported that we are doing what can, the same allies to almost all other allies and partners, but Germany is not an ally of Ukraine and therefore is not a part of any alliance. So that means that Ukrainians, as Joe Biden, the Western countries, United States, America says, that if USA is not going to send money, there are very high chances that nobody in the world will send money to Ukraine. But even this is not the most important updates, because probably as of 6th of December, the most important update is that Vladimir Putin, the president of Russian Federation, visited the United Arab Emirates today, and that was amazing. That was not like even a visit, that was a real show of the president of Russian Federation. There are a lot of things, a lot of videos you have already seen, but the most important ones probably this one, that the Russian president was supported by 5 Su-35S fighters, one of the most modern and most powerful aircrafts in Russia, and they have very powerful missiles. And as I understand, the Russians and Vladimir Putin didn't afraid of anything while moving in direction of United Arab Emirates. And now when talking about the situation in this country, we saw the video, we saw the show, and most of the people all over the world have already told us that that was not just the visit of a president of Russian Federation, that was the visit of a Tsar, of an emperor, of a Tsar, of a king of the world, whatever, because he was all this show, all these planes with Russian color. I don't remember any of the leaders who was met in this country in the Middle East like Vladimir Putin was met today. A lot of very interesting things, and this is not the most important update, because after the negotiation with the authorities of United Arab Emirates, Vladimir Putin flew to the Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and he has the meeting. He had the meeting with the crown prince of this this country. There are also were some negotiations. Probably the negotiations are taking place right now. Maybe by the time you watch this video, the negotiations will be completed. And this negotiation and this meeting also is not the most important update. Like, the most important is that all these events together, because according to information we have, tomorrow Putin is going to fly to Iran, and he is going to have the meeting with the head and the president of Iran, Raisi. And the thing is that, if you ask my opinion, when I see the destination and the road of Vladimir Putin trip, like United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, then Iran, first the things that comes to my mind that the Russian president visited every single country that they have the largest production of oil and gas. And if you ask my opinion, I believe that they're planning to make a strike against the Western countries, and as I understand, soon we're going to see the raise of the cost and the price for oil and gas. And when talking about the situation, of course, the fourth thing that comes, the next thing that comes to my mind is the North America and the situation in Venezuela. And as you can see, today, those days, the previous weekend, there was like a referendum in this area where the population of Venezuela voted to take control over some part of their neighbor country, and to create the 24th state of the country. And we are talking about Guyana, Sequilo. And according to information we have recently, there was discovered the largest depot of oil, and obviously we know that such organizations like OPEC and OPEC Plus, Venezuela is a part of these organizations. So that's why, as I understand, the eastern countries, not western countries, took a decision to establish 100% control over the oil over the world, and to establish their own price for this product. So we'll see what is going to be next, but obviously something big is going to happen. Now let's move to the situation in Ukraine, and we have a lot of very interesting updates, and the most important updates are coming from probably the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, because the Russians are saying that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost just during the day 1,030 soldiers. Imagine yourself, just for one day, the Ukrainians lost more than 2 battalions. Very heavy clashes. The Russians are gaining momentum in their offensive operation. The Russians are attacking all over the front line. The only area where the Russians are not attacking is Kherson, because the current situation completely fits the Russian requirements. They control the Ukrainians' forces that Ukrainians send from their bank to this bank of the river. They control the evacuation, and the Ukrainians have significant losses every single day. As of today, the Ukrainians lost 80 soldiers on 3 armored vehicles. The Russians were bombing and attacking them not just on the bank of the river, but also along Dnipro River and so on. When talking about details about this territory, the most important updates are coming from the southern part of Dnipro River, from the islands. And we have one interesting geolocation that was published by the Ukrainians. This is very fresh video. We got this update just today. And according to this video, as you can see, the Ukrainian FPV drone was bombing and attacking the Russian forces among the islands. So according to this geolocation, we can make a conclusion that probably the Russians have control at least over these islands and over this territory. So very interesting, because this area, according to this map, is located in the gray zone, and I was always afraid of making any changes in this area, because we don't have a lot of updates, and very difficult to understand which islands are under Russian control and which one are under Ukrainian. But we have a very interesting geolocation that the Russians do have positions very close to the cities like Izomys and Vilinetskaya. So obviously we see that there is some activity from the Ukrainian side, and if we increase the number of updates since the beginning of this month, we have one update from the Bilogrudovo. If you remember, a few days ago, the Ukrainians published their video of their their offensive and special operation. So as I can see, according to these three icons, it's not so many when talking in comparison with Avdiivka, but when talking even about this concentration of icons, I assume that very soon the Ukrainians will make more attempts to establish control over every single island in this area, and probably the main purpose and the main goal of the Ukrainians is to unblock Kherson port and Kherson city, and to connect Kherson with Nikolaev and, let's say, Odessa with the sea. I'm not sure whether the Ukrainians are able to do this or not, but obviously they will try to do this in the very near future. Also, we have continued bombardments of the cities like Kazatsk and Vesele. When talking about Krynki, when talking about Tyaginka, all these cities, we understand the purpose of the Russian bombardments, but we still haven't found any answer why the Russians are bombing Vesele, Berislav, all these cities so heavy. We haven't seen any attempts from the Ukrainian side to attack from this direction or something like this. Now we're moving further to Zaporizhzhia area, and probably this is the calmest front line in the entire special military operation. According to the Russians, as a result of clashes and bombardments and activity in this area, the Ukrainians lost 55 soldiers, and this is the lowest number, the lowest level of losses all over the entire front line. So just regular activity, just a military routine without any attempts from both sides to do anything, and basically neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians want and have possibilities to do this. The Ukrainians basically don't have the fresh forces. They're sending everything they can from Zaporizhzhia to Avdiivka, to Kupyansk, to Artyomovsk, Bakhmut, to Kherson area, and the Russians are doing the same, or the Russians are trying to follow the situation and they try to see when the Ukrainians will lose their critical mass in this direction, and maybe then the Russians will try to attack in this area as well. But for now, the Russians are trying to keep the current situation as is, like 50-50. Now we are moving to the south, Donetsk direction, and as you can see, we have lots of updates from this territory. The Russians continue bombarding and attacking the Ukrainians with FPV drones in the vicinity of Guyana, and this is the second video in a row of the Russian attack on this territory. If you remember, just yesterday we discussed another video. For example, on the 5th of December, we got the video how the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian artillery position. So we see that the Russians are pretty focused in the south Donetsk direction, and after a few weeks of operational pause, after the last clashes on Novomikhailivka, the Russians spilled too much blood. Those attacks, they need some time to regroup, and they complete the regrouping, and now they started once again attempts to storm Novomikhailivka. Yesterday we already discussed how the Russians destroyed and attacked the Ukrainian armored vehicles on the edge positions of the city, and now the Russians are bombing this area, let's say like in the central part of this territory. Very interesting video is coming from the south of Marinka. On this video, for example, we can see how the Russian tank was moving somewhere in the south of Marinka and was attacking Ukrainian positions like that located, let's say, in 10-15 meters in front of tank. And according to this video, this is the Russian tank, by the way, and the Russian tank was attacking the tree line in front of him. So according to this video, as I understand, the Russians or the Ukrainians during the previous clashes and days managed to restore control over this territory, at least due to this video. I can't tell you for sure, and for now I'm not planning to change the map, but if we continue receiving updates, there are very high chances that as a result of clashes during the previous half a year, the Russians were forced to step back from the outskirts of Pobeda back to Marinka. And now the Russians are trying to restore control over this territory, and that attack was first attempt from the Russian side to do this. So the Russians were attacking with tanks somewhere in this direction. Now we are moving further to the north, and we are going to talk about Avdiivka, and we have, as you can see, lots of updates, and the main area and the main concentrations of fire are located on the north, on the line of Tonenka and Severne. First, let's start with the southern direction. The Russians attack and bomb the Ukrainians with FPV drones in Pervomaiska. There are a lot of Ukrainian forces in this village. They are sending more and more, so this is not something like a clearing operation or storming operation like in Stepovo, Berdiche. This is just regular military routine with the purpose to using the equipment with night vision to reduce Ukrainian forces as much as possible. Maybe after that they will launch an offensive operation, but we know that Ukrainians still have some resources, and they're sending more and more. So we can say that when talking about Pervomaiska, the situation in this area is almost the same as in Krynki. The Russians, as you can see, managed to half encircle encircle this village from the south and from the north, and basically the Ukrainians, when they send some forces in this area, they have very poor, let's say, communication connections with the mainland. The Russians do have electronic warfare superiority, and just using FPV drones and artillery and mortar bombardments, the Russians are trying to attack everything and bomb everything that comes in this salient. As you can see, and when talking about the current situation, maybe this is another Russian tactic. If we take a look at the front line, starting from Krinky, ending with Kupyansk, we see a salience every single front line. When talking about Kherson, Krinky salient, a small artillery pocket that the Russians created, and the Ukrainians have significant losses. Bradley Square or Robotina pocket, artillery pocket, the area that the Russians control with their artillery forces, and they're bombing and attacking the Ukrainians heavy, and the Ukrainians have significant losses in this area. The next artillery pocket is Novomikhailivka, another small half encirclement from the south and from the north, and every single day we got more and more videos of Russian full fire control, aviation control over this territory, and the Ukrainians losing dozens of soldiers every day. The second artillery pocket is Pervomayska, big Avdiivka artillery pocket that the Russians bomb with all types of weapons they have every single day, and more and more and more. So this is maybe the Russian tactics, because when talking about the Russians and the Ukrainians, we don't see so many artillery pockets from the Russian side. The Russians try to avoid this situation, and if they see that the situation very close to cauldron or artillery pocket, the Russians try to shorten and maintain the combat line, and they're just withdrawing their positions. So let's return back to Avdiivka area. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes on this area on Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 300 soldiers, 8 armored vehicles, and 5 artillery systems. Very interesting update regarding the artillery systems, because yesterday the Russians managed to destroy just few artillery systems. The day before yesterday, 2, 3, and so during the previous days, the Ukrainians tried not to use artillery systems so many. And now we see that the Russians almost on every single front line destroy from 3 and even more artillery systems, which means that Ukrainians either try to, let's say, to maintain their artillery pockets and to force the Russians to step back, or maybe to help the Ukrainians to counterattack. But from the other side, that means that maybe the Russians are making offensive operation, and the Ukrainians are forced to bring their artillery forces closer to the combat line to stop the Russian progress. So we see concentration of fire of the Russian forces on the line Tonenькая Severna. This is obviously artillery and FPV drone preparation, so we should expect within the next 48 hours more attempts from the Russian side to rush this territory with significant number of armored vehicles, tanks, and obviously there are very high chances that Severna during the next attack will fall, and the Russians will establish, or at least will be able to enter this village from some direction and to dig in deeper. When talking about the southern direction, the situation in this area is not so good for the Russians. When talking about the Ukrainian defense belt that located in Tsarskaya Khota and the Soborna Street, this territory, that area is under complete Russian control. The Russians during the first days of clashes managed to establish control over this territory, but then the Ukrainians forced the Russians to step back, and the Russians moved back to the south, and now the Ukrainians control the territory. Machine gun positions that we discussed, if you remember, that there was like a machine gun automation weapon. So the clashes in this area continues, and for now I don't see any notes, any signs that the Russians are going to storm this territory once again. Obviously they will try to bypass this territory from the north along the Sinovataya line or something like this. Right before I start making this video, we got more updates that the Russians launched offensive operation on the line Krutaya Balka Avdiivka. So something like this probably the Russians are trying to implement currently. And as we discussed, the Russians are trying to cut the territory of the Ukrainians that goes from the north, from Kamyanka to the south in direction of industrial zone. So everything that lays in this let's say gray square, the Russians are able to establish control over and to secure this territory from the Ukrainian artillery fire. When talking about northern direction, the Russians don't have such a good things and situation as they have on the south. The Ukrainians, as I understand, have almost 80% control over Stepova, There are very heavy clashes, and the losses from both sides are very heavy. We have just for today 2 geolocations from this territory from the Ukrainian side, how they were moving along the Stepova area as close as possible to the railways, and from hidden position or from within a distance, the Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the Russian forces along the railway. So for now, I see that the Russians still haven't managed to break the situation in Stepova. The Ukrainians hold this territory, and for now I don't see the date, or I can't tell you that in the very near future the Russians will be able to establish control over this village. Maybe they will do this night, I don't know. But when talking about geolocations, the videos we get from this area, as I understand, the battle for this foothold is going to take for the next week or maybe even 2. So let's see, because the longer battle takes place in this area, the less possible positions either the Russians or the Ukrainians can hold on this territory. So there is a possibility that the Ukrainians will basically step back because everything will be reduced to ruins, and the Russians won't be able to enter because there are no positions to hide. So almost something the same as in Robotina area. Now we are moving further, and we got another video how the Russians managed to evacuate Bradley. They published the full video how they were discovered every single part of that vehicle, and this video is geolocated. This is exact area where the Bradley was captured and evacuated to Russian engineering plants and Russian engineers for, let's say, for parts for understanding of this Bradley from inside. Now we are moving to Artyomovsk Bakhmut direction, and we also have a lot of updates. The Russians launched a very powerful series of offensive all over the combat line, starting from Dubovo, Vasilievka in direction of Bogdanovka, from Berkhovka, Yagidne in direction of the rail of the Chasov Yar canal, from Khromovo in direction of the same road, and from Khromovo in direction of Ivanovska, from the southwestern part of Bakhmut in direction of Dachin residential area, from Bakhmut in direction of 215.7 hill, from Kurdyumovka, Zelenopolye to the north in direction of Andreevka. There were clashes in the vicinity of Avdiivka. So I think that the days of Ukrainian foothold in this area are numbered. I'm not sure that the Ukrainians are able to hold this territory. Furthermore, during the day we got one of the most important updates, that as a result of Russian offensive operation along this line, the Russians managed to establish control over the hill 215.7. This territory currently is under complete Russian control, and this is the highest point in this area, and from exactly this territory the Russians can control everything that located around this territory, and basically the Russians have already established full fire control over the village by the name of Klishevka. The Russians managed to establish full fire control over the Ukrainian supply roads that goes from the mainland to Andreevka. So as I understand, one more time, the days of this foothold is numbered. Furthermore, the Russians are pushing from the southwestern part to the Dachi, and today we got some geolocations of Russian FPV drone strikes, and as a result of those strikes, some of the Ukrainian forces took a decision to withdraw their positions, and basically they ran away. So, and some sources are saying that as a result of clashes on this direction, the Russians currently control something like this. This is a very powerful, significant result, and the Russians are targeting from this area to attack Ivanovskaya from the southeast. Also, lots of updates are coming from Bogdanovka territory. We got another geolocated video. The Russians discovered the Ukrainian machine gun position, and as a result of artillery strike, that territory and that position was also destroyed. If you remember, during the yesterday we have already discussed some videos from this territory, and this is the second video in a row from this area. Yesterday the Russians were storming positions that located a little bit to the north, so that was the Russian yesterday's attack. As I understand, as a result of those clashes, the Russians managed to establish control over this territory. As you can see, I have updated the map, and currently this area is in the gray zone, but I'm just giving you that to understand the Russian progress. So once again, let's repeat the yesterday videos. This is it. Another Ukrainian position. As you can see, according to the interface of the video, this video and the video we saw a minute ago was prepared by the same Russian forces, same Russian squad, or So as you can see, the Russians were bombed this territory, and now the Russians have moved their focus further to the south, so which also can mean that the Russians continue offensive operation. And once again, on this territory, exactly on the north of Bogdanovka, we can find the second highest place in this area. The Russians have already established control over the first highest place in this area, over in Klishchiivka, and now they're trying to do this on the north of Bogdanovka. If these two highest positions are taken by the Russians, that means that they will establish control over everything in this area, and the Ukrainians' front line will be collapsed, and then they will be forced to step back, not just from Ivanovska, Bogdanovka, and so on. They will be forced also to step back from Grigorovka and probably from Orekhovo-Vasilievka, and the Russians will establish the front line on the south, on the area between Minkovka and Orekhovo-Vasilievka. So this is the situation in this area. Furthermore, the Russian sources are saying that the Russians launched significant number of attacks in Siversk direction. We got at least two updates. The first one we got from the Rybar, the Russian military expert, and according to him, the Russians managed to penetrate the Ukraine's defense belt and to develop their offensive operation along the railways in direction of Vyimka. Currently, it's unknown what exactly the Russians managed to establish control over, but other Russian sources are saying that as a result of the second attack, the Russians managed to enter the village by the name of Veselaya, and currently there are very heavy clashes inside of this village, and the Russians are doing the clearing operation. If the Russians are able to hold this territory for another night, then we can say and make conclusion that 10th Mountain Assault Brigade was forced to step back from this territory, and the Russians managed to dig in deeper. And after establishing control over Veselaya, the Russians will have a gate to continue offensive operation and to attack Razdolovka from behind. So the entire front line can collapse just because of one village. When talking about Liman direction, the Russians are saying that Ukrainians lost 290 soldiers. The level of losses are very heavy. Yesterday the level was 55, the day before yesterday 280. Anyway, we see that the Russians increasing their pressure. The only thing we don't have is geolocation from this territory. And when talking about Kupyansk direction, we have few updates. The Russians destroyed the Ukrainian base in Barova, as we discussed in the previous video. The Ukrainians lost 60 soldiers, including 20 killed, and the Russians continue offensive operation in Kupyansk direction as well. The Ukrainians during the previous night, they lost 140 soldiers. The main direction of Russian attacks are the same, like in direction of Sinkovka, the forest, in the vicinity of Yagidna, Ivanovka, Kislovka, Kotorovka. The same numbers, the same days, the same villages and the cities. So we see that the Russians are pushing all over the front line. The Ukrainians, they're still holding their bridgehead, but as you can see, the Russians made a very interesting and smart step. They launched the greatest offensive operation in direction of Avdiivka, and the Ukrainians, being afraid of losing this foothold, were forced to concentrate everything and anyone they have in this direction. And as soon as the Ukrainians did that, the Russians start offensive all over the front line, and now the Ukrainians have gap and insufficiency of manpower in Zaporizhzhia, in South Donetsk, in Vremivka tactical bridgehead, in Bakhmut, Artyomovsk, on Liman. The Ukrainians probably, and there are very high chances that Ukrainians will save Avdiivka. Of course, they have such chances, but they can lose everything else. And basically Avdiivka will be encircled, or nobody gonna need Avdiivka because the rest of Ukraine will collapse or something like this. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.